Thank you for coming back to join us for part 4, which is the final part of our What You Didn't Know About the Tammi Terrell miniseries. Without further ado, let's jump right into the story. 2 weeks after recording Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing, something happened that would mark the beginning of the end of the duo of Marvin Gaye and Tammi Terrell. Marvin and Tammi had been touring and doing shows at colleges across the country. That's how it came to pass that on October the 14th, 1967, they had a show at Hampden-Sydney College in Virginia. While they were performing their song Your Precious Love, Tammi suddenly collapsed into Marvin's arms. Thinking that whatever happened was a fluke, the duo kept touring and moved on to their next show. Shockingly, Tammi would pass out again during that show. After this, the rest of the tour was put on hold, and Tammi flew back to Detroit. Not wanting to stay by herself, she stayed at her friend Dolores' house. Shortly after that, Tammy's mother came to pick her up and take her back to Philadelphia. At that point, Tammi was partially paralyzed on one side of her body. Additionally, her mouth was twisted and her eyes were disoriented. When she spoke, she did so very slowly and with a slur. Because of these facts, it was initially assumed by the family that she'd suffered a stroke. To find out more information, Tammi was taken to the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, where she stayed for about a week. During that time, doctors still weren't able to determine what was wrong with her. It would take a trip to the dentist for the investigation into her illness to get pointed in the right direction. After returning home from the hospital, Tammi began complaining about extremely painful toothaches. As a result, she went to the family dentist. The dentist recommended that Tammi be seen at the Graduate Hospital in Philadelphia by a neurologist as soon as possible. He told her family that because a relative of his had the same symptoms as Tammi had, and they eventually passed away from a brain tumor. The family followed the dentist's advice, and sure enough, tests that Tammi took showed that she had an acorn-sized brain tumor. They then set her up for surgery, which due to the location of the tumor would be highly risky. The goal of the surgery, of course, was to remove the tumor, but without doing any damage to Tammy's brain. As a result, they couldn't remove all of the tumor, but they removed as much of it as they could. Later, doctors revealed that they were somewhat certain at that point that Tammy's tumor was not only malignant, but also terminal. However, they didn't tell her this because they weren't 100% sure it was true. One thing they did know for certain was that the tumor would keep growing back and that they would never be able to remove all of it. After this original 6-hour surgery, Tammi remained in hospital for 4 weeks. She finally was released towards the end of November in 1967. When she got home, there were cards, flowers, fruit baskets, and gifts from her fans and fellow entertainers. There were plenty of her favorite flowers, which were birds of paradise. Additionally, Dionne Warwick had sent her a large green teddy bear. A couple of months later, while still recovering from this surgery, fluid had built up again in Tammy's head and had to be drained. As she remained in the hospital, Marvin Gaye came to visit her. In fact, he would stay in Philly for several days so that he could spend more time with her. He told Tammi that he was anxious for her to get better and come back to performing. This made Tammi very happy, and she promised Marvin that she would get better no matter what. It was during this time that their friendship deepened, as Tammy's illness had brought them closer together than ever. After Marvin left town, he would still constantly call to check on her to see how she was doing. After this particular surgery, Tammi felt much better, and she believed herself to be cured. She was very focused on getting back to Motown, singing, and performing. While Motown didn't discuss Tammy's illness publicly, Berry Gordy was in contact with the family. He assured them that Tammi had his full support. Additionally, Gordy agreed to cover all of Tammy's expenses and her medical bills. Tammi also had a who's who of visitors that came to see her. including NFL player Jim Brown, Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, musician Hugh Masekela, and comedian Flip Wilson. Powell's visit in particular touched Tammi. He gave her a note that said, quote, "Go it in faith," unquote. This seemed to inspire Tammi and would prove to be a source of strength for her on a daily basis. To her, the note meant that she would go through her illness with God. Several more visits would occur to have tubes inserted to drain fluid from her head, then still more visits to reposition those same tubes. After all that, Tammi was more anxious than ever to get back to work. After consulting with her doctors, they gave her the okay to return to Detroit and to do some recording. The Tammi that got back to Detroit, though, was not quite the same Tammi that she used to be. As a result of her brain surgery, Tammy's hair had to be shaved. She covered this up by wearing a wig. Additionally, when she recorded, she was weak and would tire quickly. Despite it all, she tried hard, and she did the best that she could. It was during these sessions where rumors and the question of whether Valerie Simpson was singing in place of Tammi originally emerged. As Tammi was weak and couldn't work as long or as hard as she used to, Valerie would, Johnny Bristol would later say, quote, help Tammi get through, unquote, these recording sessions. At certain times, Valerie would sing along with Tammi to support her vocals when they would falter. While Bristol stopped short of saying that Valerie sang in Tammy's place, some of the words he used seemed to say that without using those exact words. Statements he made such as, quote, under the circumstances, it was the best thing to do for Tammi. The work was done with Tammi there. She was part of the process, unquote. And, quote, you can hear them both. It needed to be done, unquote. Perhaps give credence to those rumors. Despite any rumors of who sang what, Marvin and Tammy's second album, You're All I Need, was released in August of 1968. It featured the hits Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing and You're All I Need to Get By. Aside of the success of the album, Tammi was struggling more than ever with her health. The latter part of 1968 found her undergoing still more surgeries, followed by more stays in the hospital. She was still partially paralyzed and was blind for a brief period as well. We're going to take a short break here and ask you to be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share our videos. We appreciate you taking time to hang out with us. Now, back to our story. Meanwhile, in January of 1969, Tammy's solo album, Irresistible, was released. The album was made up of singles that Terrell had recorded for Motown between 1965 to 1968. It would be the only solo album that Tammi ever released. Sadly, 1969 would be a tough year for her. She was often in a lot of pain and had to endure more surgeries. She would wind up in a wheelchair, and her weight would get down to a mere 93 pounds. At the beginning of the year, though, she would bounce back and begin to feel better. By March of 1969, she was performing again. Shortly after that, she headed back to Detroit for another recording session. She was not necessarily well enough to record, but her family let her do it because she wanted to. However, her usual energy and flirtatious manner were gone, and she was a shell of her former self. In fact, sometimes she could only record a line or two in the studio before she'd have to rest. Again, as in the previous album's recording sessions, there were rumors that Valerie Simpson had to sing vocals in Tammy's place due to her weakened state. According to the rumors, this would have been necessary in order to complete the album. The album was completed and released on September 16, 1969. In her personal life, a good thing that happened to Tammi in 1969 was that she got engaged. While she was at her weakest point in her adult life, Tammi perhaps had found the elusive love that she'd been searching for. She met Dr. Ernest Garrett at a party. He caught her attention because he was sitting down in the corner doing a crossword puzzle at a party. She approached him and asked him what he was doing. Then she asked him if she could see what he was doing. From there, she started doing crossword puzzles in the corner with him. Garrett was a good man who was interested in Tammi. He thought she was intelligent while also being streetwise. He enjoyed her company and he wanted to be there for her to take care of her, the complete opposite of selfish men like James Brown or David Ruffin. Additionally, he was more of an intellectual, which Tammi loved about him. They often enjoyed taking long drives together too. Tammi began to spend a lot of time with him and their friends in New Jersey. By the fall of 1969, Tammi's health was still going downhill. The radiation treatments that she'd been receiving 3 times a week weren't working as well as they had before. By the time Christmas came, she was bedridden. At this point, even Marvin feared the worst for her. This hurt him deeply as he felt that she was going to die, and there was nothing that he could do about it. Unfortunately, Marvin was right. There wouldn't be one of the bounce back that Tammi had become famous for. She was in constant pain now, so much so that she would cry out loudly because it was so terrible. When 1970 came, Tammi was close to the end of her health struggles, close to the end of everything. On January the 18th, 1970, she was admitted to the hospital for her 8th and final operation. More fluid was drained from her head, and increasingly powerful doses of morphine were given for her pain. In February, Tammi slipped into a coma. In March, she still hadn't gotten any better. Finally, mercifully, on the morning of March 16th, 1970, Tammi Terrell passed away. According to her mother, her last words were, "God, God, God, God." After Tammy's passing, her mother and her sister were too distraught to even think about making funeral arrangements. In fact, during the funeral, Tammy's fiancé Ernest had to sedate both of them. Beforehand, he helped Tammy's father make calls and set everything up for the funeral. Additionally, Tammy's father called her best friend Dolores in Detroit and asked her to fly out to be with the family as they mourned. To show you how callous and evil some people are, when Tammy's family went to the hospital to collect her personal belongings, her ID, her driver's license, and a ring that she had kept in the lockbox had been stolen. Additionally, rings that she had been wearing while she was in the hospital also had been stolen. 4 days after Tammi passed, her funeral was held on a rainy Friday night. Rumor has it that Tammy's mother, angry at Motown for what she saw as the label's failure to help Tammi during her illness, barred anyone from the label for attending Tammy's funeral. Reportedly, she was also angry because she felt the label hid Tammy's condition while also releasing albums without Tammy's approval. Finally, she blamed the label for not protecting Tammi from the abusive David Ruffin. If in fact she did bar the label from attending, she made one exception. Marvin Gaye was allowed to attend. Tammy's mother believed Marvin to be Tammy's closest friend. It was true. Marvin's connection to Tammi was no act. He wept openly throughout Tammy's funeral. Even as he gave a short eulogy during the program, he was in tears. As further proof of how much he suffered Tammy's passing, numerous people in his life, from Claudette Robinson to Mary Wilson, have testified as to how deeply he grieved for her and how unconcerned he was with his career or much of anything else. In fact, it would be 3 years before Gaye would be in a good enough place mentally to start doing live shows again. Rumor also has it that Tammy's death was what sent Marvin spiraling into the heavy drug use that would affect him for the rest of his life. While Marvin blamed himself for Tammy's death for not realizing exactly how sick she was sooner, the public at large had other people, 2 other people in particular, that they felt were responsible for what had happened to her. Many people believed, and some people still believe, that the physical assaults that Tammi suffered at the hands of David Ruffin, as well as from James Brown, were responsible for her headaches and her subsequent death. However, Dr. Shute, the doctor that initially operated on Tammi, said that beatings nor any type of trauma could be responsible for or could have caused the brain cancer that killed Tammi. This is the same thing that Tammy's fiance, who was a physician himself, said as well. Other doctors as well have agreed with these statements. Tammi's passing was front page news and was reported around the world, as was proper. Not only had the world lost an up-and-coming talent who was already highly accomplished, the world at large was also robbed of the promise that that talent showed. As often happens with death, a person's passing leaves the living with unanswered questions. What great duets had been missed out on that she and Marvin could have done? How many more solo albums could she have recorded? If she had lived, how might that have altered the path that Marvin Gaye chose for his life? Unfortunately, these are questions we will never know the answers to. However, even though her life was very short, Tammi Terrell left us with timeless music that we can listen to and enjoy whenever we want. In that way, she's never really left us at all. Thank you for joining us on our journey through the life of Tammi Terrell that we titled What You Didn't Know About Tammi Terrell. Hopefully, we were able to present new and interesting information that kept you entertained. Thank you for coming back to check us out. Thank you for watching and listening to us. Thanks again, and see you soon.